Just so you know, this show is about scary stuff. So don't say I didn't warn you guys. And remember, don't be scared.
Episode 114, Affirmative Defense. War Baby here with another episode of Murderous Minors. The past few months have seen several cases we've previously discussed come to final conclusions. So before we discuss the ongoing case of Chrystul Kizer out of Kenosha, Wisconsin, I want to update you on the cases of Eric Smith, Henry Montgomery, and very briefly, Kyle Rittenhouse. Back on August 2nd, 1993, 4-year-old Derek Roby of Savona, New York, set off alone for the very first time to walk down the street to the neighborhood summer recreation program, also attended by 13-year-old soon-to-be 6th grader Eric Smith. The now 41-year-old described at his 11th parole hearing on October 5th, 2021, how he, quote, became the bully that I disliked in everything else in my life, going on to describe how other kids bullied him based upon his physical appearance, and how at home his father bullied his mother and children with verbal abuse. According to his statement, seeing the small, defenseless boy made his own anger overwhelm him and, quote, the first thought I had was to hurt him, to take my anger out on him. I was constantly being targeted for being weaker, smaller, and I became the bully towards him and he didn't deserve it. Media outlets such as USA Today filed Freedom of Information Act requests and published the transcript of the hearing, in which Smith described to the parole board how he convinced Derek to stray from his path under the guise of showing the boy a shortcut. Once they were out of view, Smith said he choked the toddler until he lost consciousness, after which he punched him and struck him multiple times in the head with a rock. His heart was still beating, Smith said, so he took a stick and tried to pierce the boy's body in order to end his life so that he couldn't, quote, tell somebody that I had hurt him. After failing to stab him through the eye and the chest, Smith immaturely and illogically settled on the rectum. When Derek Roby was discovered a few hours later, his pants and underwear were down around his ankles and the stick was protruding from his tiny body. Smith said he left the little boy on top of a pile of rocks and rode his bike back to the day camp, where he sat at a table for a while before hopping back on and riding his bike around town. He was interviewed as part of the investigation, however, no actual suspicion fell on him. His confession to family members the following week ultimately led to the case being closed. Regarding Derek Roby's parents, Smith told the parole board, quote, if they were sitting in front of me right now, I would say I'm sorry, even though that would almost cause more emotional pain because sorry is not bringing him back. Smith, who is engaged to a woman who wrote to him while she was studying law, was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 9 years to life, staying in juvenile custody until he was 21, at which time he was moved to the adult population where he's remained for the past 20 years. The now middle-aged Smith was officially granted parole on his 11th try and became eligible for release about 6 weeks after the hearing on November 17, 2021. His initial request to return to the same home he lived at when he killed Derek was denied. His release date came and went, and Smith remains incarcerated at Woodbourne pending a post-release address approval from the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. Although the Robys attended all of the other hearings and even lobbied extensively for changes to legislation aimed at raising minimum sentences, they didn't appear or release a statement in regards to the news of Smith's impending release. I'll let you know when a date has been decided. I know this seems like a huge coincidence, but on the very same day that Eric Smith's parole was granted following his 28-year incarceration, Louisiana's longest-serving inmate was also paroled after serving more than 57 years of his juvenile life without parole sentence that had previously been the death penalty. In 1963, 17-year-old Henry Montgomery was ditching school one day when East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Deputy Charles Hurt, a 39-year-old married father of 3 who'd only been with the department for a year and a half, attempted to question him after responding to a call about truant students hanging around the rec center near Scotlandville High School. Montgomery shot the deputy when he tried to take him into custody, although his partner did report at the time that Hurt did put his hands up and back away when he saw the .22 pistol. The teen was tried as an adult and convicted, receiving the death penalty. However, the Louisiana Supreme Court overturned that conviction in 1966, saying that Montgomery had not received a fair trial, which I've talked about before. He was convicted when retried in 1969 and was sentenced that time to life without the possibility of parole. 4 years after Miller v. Alabama deemed juvenile life without parole sentences unconstitutional, Montgomery successfully had his case heard by the U.S. Supreme Court, basically forcing them to make the decision in Miller retroactive, sparking the wave of resentencings around the country that has seen many previously incarcerated juveniles released, including our friend Tony Esprit. Although Montgomery himself was resentenced to life with the possibility of parole in 2017, his next attempts were denied until November 17, 2021. He will live with lifelong supervision and the threat of returning to prison should he violate his parole. Before leaving Angola prison to return to East Baton Rouge Parish, Montgomery said, quote, "You can't put sorry into words, in the right words to be used in a time like this. I did all the time, but I still have to live with that decision for the rest of my life." The family of Deputy Hurt has always opposed Montgomery's release. However, his daughter Becky did clarify, quote, "We forgave him years and years ago, but we feel like there aren't many things you should have to forfeit your freedom for life, and taking a life is one of them. We hope that now he is out, he finds happiness and has a good life." Currently, 24 states have banned juvenile life without parole sentences. This episode is sponsored by EveryPlate. Christmas is here, and giving yourself and your wallet a break just seems like a great idea. Imagine it. Delicious, affordable EveryPlate meals delivered right to your door that are ready in just 6 easy steps. EveryPlate meals are 50% cheaper than meals you'd make with grocery store bought ingredients, which will leave more in your pocket for a New Year's treat. With EveryPlate's easy-to-follow recipe cards and pre-portioned ingredients, there's less prepping and cooking, meaning you get more time to relax and enjoy the delicious meal. I've ordered so many kits by now that I've grown attached to some meals, and I love when my favorite recipes come around, like diner-style chicken with gravy and cherry-glazed pork meatballs, but I love trying new recipes too. EveryPlate really helps with my terrible case of daily dinner indecision as well. Now it's your turn. Try EveryPlate for just $1.79 per meal by going to everyplate.com and entering code WARBABY179. That's everyplate.com, code WARBABY179 to get started. 2 days after Eric Smith in New York and Henry Montgomery in Louisiana were paroled, Kyle Rittenhouse's trial ended in his full acquittal the Friday before Thanksgiving, November 19, 2021. If anyone is interested in anything he has to say, he's currently speaking everywhere, from TV to podcast to gigs in person where I live. Various student groups at Arizona State University have protested against the university having any affiliation with Rittenhouse, who previously claimed to be a student studying nursing there. ASU has stated that though he may have taken classes there, he's never been enrolled in a degree-seeking program, which requires admittance to the university. He's not currently enrolled. Rittenhouse's case is but one of several high-profile cases out of Kenosha, Wisconsin that involve high bail amounts and self-defense claims, and as his acquittal was imminent, many juvenile justice advocates in the area turned their attention back to the 2018 murder of Randy Volar by 17-year-old Chrystul Kizer, who was 16 when she met the 33-year-old in 2017. They'd met when the teen, on the advice of a girl she knew, placed an ad on the now-defunct website Backpage.com, an online ad marketplace based out of Arizona that ended up being used mostly to sell sex. The site was seized by the FBI just 2 months after Volar was arrested for child enticement, second-degree sexual assault of a child, and using a computer to facilitate a child sex crime on February 22, 2018. By then, 16-year-old Chrystul Kizer had been hanging around with Volar for months, during which time he sexually abused her and filmed it, giving her food, money, and gifts in return, and she wasn't the only underage victim, according to the discoveries investigators made when they searched his home following his arrest. An unidentified 15-year-old girl had called 911 from Randy Volar's home, but when police arrived, she was found outside, walking down the street wearing nothing from the waist down and only a bra and open jacket on top. She was under the influence of LSD and told them that she'd met Volar on Backpage.com, just as Chrystul Kizer had, and this girl had even mentioned the name Chrystul when listing off other young black teens she said the man had also victimized. Kizer had been born in Gary, Indiana, to a teen mom and is the oldest of 4. As a younger child, Kizer was creative and artistic, especially in drawing and music, even being accepted to a performing arts academy for middle school where she played the violin and thrived. However, the young family soon fled the area, settling down in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and far from Kizer's mother's abusive boyfriend. Kizer's mother worked to support her 4 children, during which time Chrystul and her younger brother found themselves in regular trouble. They'd had to live in a shelter for a while, and her brother had taken to stealing cars while Chrystul had found an abusive boyfriend of her own who was 3 years her senior and had once pleaded guilty to battery for beating and restraining her. In the end, Kizer turned to Backpage.com to earn pocket money, and Volar had been the first and only person she'd met on the site, according to her later interviews with the Washington Post. She called him her only friend and lied about where all the money and gifts she was sharing with her sisters and boyfriend were coming from. Her mother never asked questions about all the new clothes. But after she'd gotten arrested and he bailed her out months later, she told the Post that he'd specified what sex acts he wanted as repayment for the $400, and she tried to step away from him to focus more on her actual boyfriend, who was 20 years old by then. Volar threatened to kill her, Kizer said, so she did what he wanted, but didn't necessarily realize that she was being filmed. Sometimes she was under the influence of drugs Volar had given her, and sometimes, Kizer alleged, he pimped her out to other men through Backpage.com, even to multiple Johns in one day, all the while abusing other teen girls as well. Investigators had already heard from the teenage 911 caller that Volar had met her the year before in 2017 too, and that he'd been paying her for sex ever since. She told them that she looked at him as a friend and that she didn't want to get him in trouble. After running away from home in late 2007, Volar had taken the then 14-year-old in, taking her on shopping trips and out to eat, sometimes with his own mother. As she was being abused and groomed by her abuser to protect him, she was at the same time aware that these filmed assaults in exchange for money were happening to other girls too. Police seemed to corroborate her allegations following their search, which turned up enough digital evidence to show investigators the very illegal sex acts that the 15-year-old 911 caller had described to them. Volar was arrested but released with no bail, pending a future court summons. Kenosha County District Attorney Michael Gravely, who had quite a bit of media coverage following the shooting of Jacob Blake and Rittenhouse's case, told the Washington Post in their 2019 expose of the murder case that the DA's office assigned a sex crimes prosecutor who was working to verify the ages and names of the girls in the abuse videos in order to determine if the charges would be misdemeanors or felonies. His office had only received the referral for charges on May 24th, less than 2 weeks before Volar was killed. A request had been made to police requesting more information, which was received in the DA's office on, you guessed it, June 5th, the day of Randy Volar's murder. Also on June 5th, Kenosha police received a call from a local TCF bank branch reporting suspicious activity on Volar's bank account, which they felt signaled participation in a human trafficking operation. The DA's office contends that the $800,000 in Volar's bank account at the time of his death came from Bitcoin trading and the like, which is actually common currency on the dark web where the purchasing of child pornography is prevalent. His bank felt that the $1.5 million in transfers they'd seen over the previous 6 months was due to something more sinister than simply trading in cryptocurrency. By the time the detective hung up and looked into Volar's file, the man had already been killed by one of the teen girls whose identity was in question, because her image had been found in photos seized from the man's home months before. As Kizer and Volar's interactions grew more volatile, her boyfriend stepped in. He taught the teen to shoot a .380 pistol and gave it to her to carry for protection, explaining later that it was because she'd said she was, quote, tired of dude touching on her, and that she'd planned to shoot him, according to the criminal complaint. On June 4th, 2018, Kizer's boyfriend went with her to court for the charge that Volar had bailed her out of jail for, and they got into a fight. She ended up texting Volar, even though she said that she'd been trying not to talk to him. He sent an Uber for Kizer just before 9 p.m. so they could eat pizza, drink alcohol, and do drugs as she brooded over the fight she had with her boyfriend. Kizer told the Washington Post that she began to feel woozy, and that the next thing she knew, Volar was beside her on the couch, his hand on her leg. She described tripping while trying to get away after Volar told her that she still hadn't repaid him for bailing her out of jail, and they ended up with Kizer on her back and Volar straddling her, trying to get her jeans off. She described the 200-pound man pinning her 104-pound body to the floor. She remembered hearing the shots, but didn't recall getting the gun from her purse and shooting 34-year-old Randall Philip Volar III 2 times in the head before setting his 360-square-foot home on fire and fleeing in his BMW, because, Kizer said, he told her he'd gift her a BMW when she turned 18. She took a selfie first, however, and posted it on Facebook, Volar's home clearly visible in the background, captioning the photo, quote, my mugshot. Police say Kizer also stole his laptop and some cash. She turned 18 behind bars, having been arrested after police tracked her down with the help of the Uber driver, who'd brought her from Milwaukee to Kenosha a little over 7 hours before a neighbor called 911 to report that Volar's house was on fire.
Fire! The house is burning. I get up in the morning.
The house on the corner of 78th Street and 14th Avenue is on fire?
Yes.
Do you see flames?
Yes. Everything is now on the flames. I just get up.
Do you know if anyone is in the house?
I don't know nothing. I went to open to knock on the door.
No. What corner is it? What corner of the streets is it?
78th Street and 14th Avenue.
And which corner? North, south, east, west?
It's west.
It's
all house on the fire.
Okay, you said you saw a door open?
Yeah, I was looking through window and looked like flame, and I went to knock on the door.
Okay.
Oh my God.
The Uber driver gave police the simple name of Chrystul after credit card records pointed them toward the app, and after the BMW was found 100 miles away in Milwaukee, where Volar was known to scope out young teens and get hotel rooms with them. Inside the dead man's abandoned car, police found a cell phone with recent selfies of 3 teenagers, 2 boys and 1 girl, along with a store receipt. On the security camera footage of that store, police found those 3 teens, and one of them, a 16-year-old boy, was known to police. He identified the girl as his sister Chrystul Kizer, on whose Facebook page police could see that she made, quote, references to a rich white individual. She shared a news article about the fire later on that night and went live on Facebook 3 days later and talked about giving her brother a BMW while brandishing the .380 pistol, telling her boyfriend in the video that she didn't, quote, want to shoot anybody else. Kizer was arrested the next day, June 9, 2018, and was charged as an adult with 5 felonies. First-degree intentional homicide, operating a motor vehicle without owner's consent, arson, possession of a firearm by a felon, and bail jumping stemming from her earlier arrest. The teen eventually confessed to shooting Volar, though she took a while to admit that she even knew the man. She'd initially told investigators when arrested that she'd seen another woman shoot him and also allegedly accused her boyfriend of the crime, but later said that she'd lied because she was scared and that she'd shot him because, quote, she got upset and was tired of Volar touching her, according to the criminal complaint. It also states that Kizer told police in her initial interview that she watched Criminal Minds on TV, which had more or less given her the idea to dump alcohol on the floor and set Volar's house on fire. Although there's no dispute that Kizer shot Volar that night, the prosecutor contends that the shooting was not self-defense because he has evidence that the killing was premeditated and that the motive was really a robbery. However, the defense felt that the murder was the direct result of child sex trafficking, setting up their attempt to use a, quote, affirmative defense. At an early pretrial conference, the defense discussed the applicability of the affirmative defense to Kizer's case, which is allowed in Wisconsin thanks to 2008 legislation making it available to those accused of crimes they purport were committed as a direct result of being human or child sex trafficked. The statute states that whether or not anyone was ever prosecuted or convicted in relation to the trafficking statute, a victim of trafficking has an affirmative defense for any offense committed as a direct result of trafficking. It's proving that the trafficking occurred and that the crime was a direct result that's tricky, and the strategy hasn't yet been used in relation to a homicide. It's usually reserved for offenses such as prostitution by an adult. 5 months after Volar's death, Kizer's defense filed a motion for discovery, seeking access to Kenosha police's files pertaining to their investigation of Randy Volar, saying that, quote, the defense believes that the discovery in this case suggests that Ms. Kizer acted in self-defense. Mr. Volar, a 34-year-old man, was engaged in the ongoing sexual and physical abuse of Ms. Kizer, then a 17-year-old girl, and several other girls whose identities are currently unknown to the defense. The Kenosha police had evidence that Mr. Volar was producing child pornography and that he was traveling to Milwaukee or transporting girls from Milwaukee to Kenosha for the purposes of sexual abuse. Though the DA admitted that such files existed, gravely opposed their release, even though the victim was killed by an individual whose image was found within the evidence of that investigation. The state contended that giving the defense access to the images of other potential child victims violated their right to privacy. 3 months later, in February 2019, Kizer's defense team was given access to whatever Volar files the judge had already seen and approved, noting that access to further information and the matter of its admissibility in court would be determined at a future date. Later on that year, in September 2019, the defense went to court to try and reduce Kizer's bond from $1 million to $50,000. However, the judge eventually settled on a lowered bond of $400,000, saying that in spite of the video evidence and suspicion from the bank, he couldn't directly tie those things to, quote, sex trafficking for business purposes. 2 months later in November, a hearing was held to determine if Kizer could in fact employ an affirmative defense, and the following month they were told no, with the circuit court only being willing to grant the request if Kizer were charged with one of the specific charges listed in the statute, which Kizer was not. The defense appealed that decision. By this time, Centoya Brown's case out of Tennessee that we previously covered had begun to bring similar cases into the spotlight, including Kizer's, while she sat in the Kenosha County Jail awaiting trial. Just before Christmas 2019, pressure from around the country and world to drop Kizer's charges led DA Gravely to post a statement to his Facebook page that read in part, quote, "I am respectfully asking folks who are interested in the Chrystul Kizer case to reserve judgment until the facts are presented in court at trial. As district attorney, I cannot condone vigilante justice, and when presented with evidence of premeditated murder, I do not believe it is appropriate for prosecutors to weigh the value of the victim's life." Kizer's murder trial was pushed back several times as motions from both sides were heard, and following the denial by Judge Wilkes regarding the affirmative defense strategy, the defense filed an appeal of that decision, requesting that the Wisconsin Court of Appeals determine whether the law applied to Kizer's case. Her next status hearing was set for June 8, 2020, and just 2 weeks after that, a coalition of community activist groups including Survived and Punished, the Milwaukee Freedom Fund, the Free Chrystul Kizer Defense Committee, the National Bail Fund Network, and the Chicago Community Bond Fund raised the $400,000 required to secure her release before trial. A great deal of those donations came in for Kizer following the police killings of Breonna Taylor in March 2020 and of George Floyd in late May, about a week before she was released. Her bond was posted on June 21, 2020, with her next status hearing scheduled for about 6 weeks later in September. Letters to the DA's office indicate that Kizer did tell them she was interested in a plea deal for intentional murder that Gravely himself admitted was an option. He also stated in June 2020 that, quote, "Even if she's convicted of a homicide charge that is currently in there, Miss Kizer, at her young age and with the offenses that Mr. Volar committed against her earlier, she is never a person who will be incarcerated for decades. That's not going to happen in this case." The DA's office doesn't dispute that Volar sexually assaulted and abused Kizer. However, it is firm in its assertion that her text messages, statements, behavior before and after the murder, and of other evidence not yet made public show that her motive was actually auto theft. The prosecution does not consider Volar's killing as a direct result of being trafficked, although why else did Volar answer the Backpage.com ad, and why were multiple recordings of the man seized from his home that seemed to depict him speaking to young teen girls on ways to be a better sexual partner? One clip is even reported to be Volar asking if a young black girl in the video with him has any interest in placing an ad for another man to answer, saying he'd give her a ride if she felt like it. But we'll never know what the man would have said regarding his actions because he's no longer here. Murderous Minors is sponsored by Best Fiends. If you need a quick pick-me-up as you maneuver through this busy holiday season, look no further than Best Fiends, my all-time favorite free-to-download Match 3 puzzle game that just has it all. A great story, adorable fiends to collect, and I love that I don't need Wi-Fi to play. Some days I can't put it down, especially as Christmas errands are beginning to close in on me because Best Fiends offers me that minute to breathe that could be the very thing that gets me through the day. Even as I approach level 800, I know that there's still thousands ahead of me and new levels added all the time, making sure that there's always a fresh challenge waiting for me the next time I play. If you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Download Best Fiends free today on the App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. Before a potential plea agreement could be seriously considered, the issue of the possibility of an affirmative defense still lingered, and Kizer was out on bail for a year before the Wisconsin Court of Appeals decided that the strategy could possibly be employed at her trial on June 2, 2021. The appellate court basically said that if Kizer could definitively prove that what she did to Volar was because he trafficked her, an affirmative defense could be applied, which would logistically resemble a more traditional self-defense argument. Immediately following that decision, prosecutors announced that they were going to appeal to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, elaborating that, quote, "It's important to have a firm set of rules decided before we proceed and have a trial." The state argued that the statute was not intended to be used as an overall defense in a homicide case, although the verbiage does specifically state that the affirmative defense can be used, quote, "for any offense committed as a direct result of being trafficked." Almost 4 months later, in late September 2021, the state's high court agreed to a review of Kizer's case so that it may determine the letter of the law in regards to Wisconsin's affirmative defense statute. Both the prosecution and the defense were required to submit to the court their written arguments, with oral arguments to take place in front of the 7 justices of the Wisconsin Supreme Court at some time in the near future. And that is where this case currently stands. The Change.org petition started more than 3 years ago that seeks all charges against Kizer be dropped is less than 3,000 signatures away from its goal of 1.5 million today. Volar's home on 14th Avenue in Kenosha, Wisconsin was ultimately demolished. His father, Randy Volar Jr., said in a statement to the Washington Post in 2019 that, quote, "The true story has yet to be told, and when the truth comes out, I hope people's perceptions of my son will change. What happened is a tragedy for both families, the Kizers and the Volars." As always, thanks for listening. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you all. Be back soon with an all-new episode, but until then, lovelies, don't be scared.